Hello guys, welcome back to my animated splash screen series. In this video, we're designing a paintbrush that reveals your application logo in such a way that is both captivating and engaging. We'll be making splash that draws in your viewers and gives your application a very good first impression. Before we start, I just want to remind you that if you've not subscribed to my channel, I really appreciate it if you do. It really helps keep the motivation going. So without wasting any much of our time, let's get started. So starting from scratch, we'll be creating our project using the Flutter create command. After the project is created, we open the project with VS Code. So once our application starts, let's remove all the boilerplate code and we'll create a page called splash. This is going to be our main screen. We'll create a stateful widget and within it we'll have our scaffold. Let's replace our home page with the splash. To start, let's have our CustomPainter. This will be in a center widget. So within the child, we'll create a paintbrush which is going to be called brush painter. Our brush painter is going to be a custom painter. So we'll extend the custom painter class. After creating the required functions in the custom painter, on the should repaint, we'll set it to true. This forces our painter to refresh whenever our state changes. Within the paint function, the first part we'll be working on is the rectangular part of the brush. So with a canvas, we'll draw a rectangle. We want our rectangle to start at the top right, so at the top left, sorry, and have a width same size as the canvas. For the height of the brush, we'll create a variable called brush height. We'll also create another variable for the paint. We'll call it brush paint. For the color, we'll set it to just a yellow color, and for the paint style, we'll set it to fill so that it covers the whole body of the rectangle. So let's move on to draw the metallic section of the brush. We'll have to use a path, and for the path we'll have to create a variable. I'll call it the metal path, and for the color we'll create another variable called metal paint. So let's draw our path. Firstly, let's move the path to the initial position. Let it be at the midpoint of the brush. Then from here, we'll move the line to the end of the width while still staying at the midpoint of the brush. But our brush looks very thin. Let's add a height to it to make it a little bit wider. So with this, it looks a little bit wider for our purpose. So we continue. So now we have the metallic part of the brush. Let's move the sides a little bit out of the canvas. Let's create the handle. We'll call this the handle parts, and for the color of this our handle will be blue, so we'll have the handle paint. Then we draw the parts. So once we refresh the page, we can see our handle has been created. Right now you can see that the metallic section appears above our brush. So we want to move this below the metallic section at least. Let's change this yellow into a gradient. I like to use a linear gradient using orange and a darker yellow. To add a gradient, we need a shader which is going to be defined within a rectangle. So since we'll be using this rectangle, I would remove this and create a variable called rectangle. The variable is going to be called rect. To add the gradient, we just remove the color and input our shader. So let's make some adjustments to the gradient. Let's complete our brush by adding a wooden handle just under the brush. We'll use a column for this, and after we add a painter, under it we add a container. Let's give our container a width of 30 and a height of 200. I would like to give it a more realistic gradient, so I'll also use a linear gradient here. We can see our gradients on the brush. It looks as though the brush is stuck inside the handle, so let's increase the height of our widget to 240. Okay, this fixes it. To keep our code clean, I'll create a new widget which I'll call paintbrush, and inside our paintbrush we'll take the whole column along with the brush painter. And within our home page, we just have a sized box that fills the whole screen. So within it, we'll add our paintbrush. The final modification to this brush, I will increase the height of the wooden handle. We'll wrap this in a positioned widget. So let's start working on the animation. Firstly, we want our brush to start at the middle of the screen, somewhere within this region. We'll use the single state provider mixing. This is required for all animations. And we initialize our animation controller. We would have a lot going on this animation, so I'll give it a duration of 10 seconds. Let's wrap our widget in an animation builder. For the first part, we would be moving the brush across the screen. So we would have two animation values, which are going to be the brush X animation and the brush Y animation, one for the X axis and the other for the Y axis. Let's create animation sequence for both the brush X and the brush Y animation. Since we already have the initial position of the brush on the screen, we'll just set the initial position on the tween to be the same as the position on the brush. We want both movements to just occur in the first 20% of the animation, so we set another TweenSequence with a value of 80 as the weight. Using the widget binding, we start our animation using controller.forward. Let's replace the constant values here with the animation values. We need to restart the application to see this in action. For the next movement of the brush, we want it to move from the top to the bottom of the screen, from 0 to 1 on the vertical axis. And since there will be no horizontal movements, we'll keep the horizontal position at 0. After the downward movement, the next motion is to slide along the horizontal axis. All the vertical values will remain constant, and this will occur for just 10% of the animation. But on the horizontal axis, we'll move from 0 to 0.5, which is half, and again it will just be for 10% of the animation. The brush leaves the screen, so let's add an offset so that we'll see the brush when it's at the bottom of the screen. The next animation will be the second vertical movement, which is going to be from the bottom of the screen to the top of the screen. For this animation, it will be moving from 1 to 0 and for 20% of the animation. And there will be no horizontal movements, so we'll keep the horizontal values constant through this animation. And after this, we would want to remove the brush from the screen. So this is going to follow a two-step process. We divide the last 30% into two on the vertical axis, and for the first 10% it remains at the top, then for the other 20% it moves from the top to outside of the screen. So use 1.5 to remove it out of the screen. No, and on the horizontal part we'll just leave it as it is, that's 0.5, 0.5. While this motion is nice, I would like to add a few changes here. So in the horizontal section, let's divide the last movement into two. So for the first 15%, we want it to move to stay in position. Then for the last 15%, let's move it from 0.5 to 0. Next, we're going to paint the whole screen yellow. This is going to make the device feel as though it's being painted by the brush. And this is where we are going to have our logo. So let's create our logo for the company. So we'll call our logo Screen Painter. You can change it to whatever you want. We are going to use two containers to cover this logo. As you can see, there's a slight space in between both of them, so on one of them I'll add one to remove that spacing. So let's run the animation and see what happens. So our aim for this next part of the animation is to remove these containers as the brush rolls over them. For this, we'll be making use of two animations. Let's initialize both of them. The first slide, which is the slide on the left hand side of the screen, we want the slide to occur when the brush moves from the top to the bottom, and this is where it occurs on the brush animation. So to do that, we make sure that during the first 20% of the animation, it stays constant. Then for the second 20%, it moves from 0 to 1. This leaves the remaining 60% where the animation remains at 1. I'll comment this out since I'll not be using it at the moment. So as you can see, we've created the animation for painting the first half of the screen. Let's move on to the second half. For this part, we want the animation to occur when the brush moves from the bottom to the top, which occurs here. For the first 50%, it would remain constant. Then after the movement on the 20% of the animation, it stays constant for the rest. So we set the slide 2 animation to the second container. We can also replace our text logo with the image of our company. That's the company using this logo. So let's do that. I'll be adding two images to our assets, our widget, and add an image. So once we restart this application, we see the animation. We can also add an image and a logo. So imagine creating an application that starts this way. Awesome, right? This is a good way to spark interest in the users of your app. Thank you for watching till this point in the video. If you like this content, feel free to subscribe to my channel and like the video. I hope to see you in my next one. Have a nice day.